Welcome to Elected, a podcast for women in and around Canadian politics. I'm your host, Sarah Elder, and today my very special guest is Patty Hajdu.
Right.
Hi, Patty.
Well done.
Thanks.
Lots of people say that name wrong.
What do they say?
Hajdu, Hajdu.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't know. Variations. So,
Well, I mean, you have your life in politics, being present and I'd say at the forefront of, the Justin Trudeau government. You're in the media. And so I hear your name. So I hope that helped. Like, I should know it, right?
I'm happy. Thank you.
Yeah. And you're the Minister of Indigenous Services Canada that
That's
I had
right.
to look at my notes for to make sure I got that right. And your riding is Thunder Bay Superior North.
Right.
But you're here in Calgary.
I am.
What brings you to town?
Well, we have a bunch of stuff happening actually this week. First and foremost, the Mental Wellness Summit. That's the third annual. This is a really exciting event that brings First Nations, Inuit, Métis leaders together, not just elected leaders, but leaders in communities, youth leaders, to talk about what's working actually in terms of supporting people to have better mental health outcomes, in terms of the kinds of recreating community that people are doing, transforming the way we conceptualize wellness and health and healing. Something that before we started this, there really wasn't an opportunity for Indigenous people to do. You know, Canada brings Indigenous people together oftentimes to grieve, to mourn, to testify to the number of different atrocious ways that colonization wreaks damage and trauma in their lives. But the process of colonialism has actually actively kept people apart from a strength-based perspective. So 3 years ago, we launched this summit, and we have been getting rave reviews ever since. And it's just so neat to listen to people get to know each other, get to know great ideas that are happening right across the country, sharing their enthusiasm and their energy for healing and recovering from colonialism. It's pretty powerful.
Well, and I think it's good to hear that that's happening because, we all too often hear about the tragedy. And it's, finding or hearing that they're like, that's not going to go away. Right. But how do we, the dynamics of, to your point, or to what you said, the community building, and then the healing and what way that might take shape.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that, and Indigenous people will tell you this, they had their own healing practices. And in fact, their cultural worldview is far more holistic than a Western worldview. Yeah. Forever, look, at individuals are people, but a First Nations worldview is far more holistic than a Western worldview. And so the holism tells and teaches and informs First Nations, Indigenous people that in order to be well, you have to be taking care of your spirit and your mind and your heart and the land and everything that surrounds you, and that we're all interconnected, and that we're connected to the land and the water in deep and profound ways. And so I actually find this extremely beautiful and poignant. It is a painful space, but it's also a really optimistic space, because communities and people are remembering the lessons of their ancestors and remembering the lessons of the connection to land-based practices and honoring, the other creatures on the earth and the land and the water around them. And I think it's the long game that they're playing in terms of, actually relearning how to live in balance. And it's something that we're really struggling with as Westerners too. I always say in my remarks, like, look, Western-based healing modalities have failed you, largely because the worldview is so different, but they're also failing Westerners. How many people are, take part in a treatment program or a recovery program that we always blame the individual. We say that they couldn't continue or that they failed. But in fact, I think a lot of times the systems are not designed to help people deal with the pain that comes from being alive. And I think this is really exciting work, actually.
Well, and I think the pain of being alive, it touches people in different ways. And
Totally.
if you have been able to escape that pain, maybe that's the ultimate definition of privilege in some
I
ways.
don't know. Maybe, or maybe oblivious. I don't know.
Oblivious, yeah.
I always wonder. But I will just say that, there's a lot of quote unquote disease or unease in general population. I mean,
Yeah.
we've got climate change and political unrest and more war than I can remember as a person. I'm 57. I grew up in a very privileged time post World War II. Things were more or less stable. The US was a little bit, doing their thing, but I was protected from the realities of sort of increasing violence and so I think, people are anxious and people are sad and people are wanting to find joy and connection. And there's some real lessons in the way Indigenous people have survived and come together, even with a huge, massive assault on their own community connectivity, their own imaginings of what family is. And so I think it's wise for us to try to learn from each other because there are things that we can learn as the colonial partner in this, and I define myself as a colonial partner, that I think would be good for the outcomes for all of us. So this job's been a real gift to get to know First Nations people.
Yeah, that does sound incredible. Did you ever think, earlier in your life that this is where you would be right now doing this work?
No. No, not at all. I knew that. Well, I had hoped, I think, especially as a younger woman, that I would do something that had purpose in life. I wanted purpose and I wanted to feel like what I was here for in this world had meaning. So and I used to actually be very depressed in my 20s periodically because I would, especially before I had kids, because, I would think, well, what is my purpose and why am I here? And I used to call them life days. I don't know why I called them that, but I would just feel like I was stuck in this quagmire of like, what is the point of it all? And not that I've ever felt suicidal, but more like, what's the reason for being?
Like the more existential.
Yes. And so, and I didn't know what the answer was. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I was meant to be. And it took a long time for me to realize that I had a certain skill in advocacy and in working with vulnerable people and elevating people's voices and trying to push forward a vision of getting through this crazy experiment of life together with compassion. And so, politics was an evolution. It certainly wasn't. And also I came from the wrong side of tracks. So all the politicians I knew seemed fancy, and men, fancy and men.
Yeah.
It wasn't something that was ever talked about as a possibility, neither in my family nor in my educational journey. As a matter of fact, my guidance counselor in grade 12 said, you should go into fashion design because you really like clothes. And I was like, no, I like wearing them.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to sew anything really. So, not a lot of great, maybe it's the same now in high schools, but not a lot of great guidance in terms of like, how do you channel this energy?
I mean, I think any guidance counselor, or maybe there's like a unicorn out there that's like, you should be in politics, right?
No,
that's not where they're driving people towards as career options.
And I don't think I had the voice I have now, even, aside from the political journey, like, the power and the confidence and the determination to be brave and say hard things. I didn't have that when I was a teenager. So
how do you find that now? Like,
it's evolved for sure. I mean, I had a really privileged opportunity in my community through successive, I would say sort of quasi leadership advocacy types of roles to be able to do things like deputations to city council and lots of media work. I ran a shelter for a long time and we kind of shamelessly used the media to get stuff that we needed. So, someone would come.
To me, that's smart.
Yeah. So we would, someone would like come with a donation of towels. We'd send out a media release. Shelter House receives a donation of towels. They'd come trotting down. They'd be like, tell us why towels are so important. And I'd be like, well, yeah, because people need to dry themselves. And next thing you know, more towels would arrive. Or we would, we'd started a variety of different, really, I think, very cutting edge programs. And so the media were really interested in the kinds of work that we were doing around harm reduction. We had a street outreach program for a while. I was always trying to get money from city council. So those skills, I think, built up over time. And prior to that, public health and drug policy. So I'm no stranger to talking about hard things, and especially hard things sometimes that people don't understand. And I think that is a muscle that develops over time.
What are some hard things that people don't understand?
Well, drug policy is a great one. I mean, there's a very vivid conversation happening in Canada around drug policy, and provinces like Alberta, the one that we're in, have decided that harm reduction is somehow, despite all evidence, somehow promote substance use. And in fact, all of the scientific evidence says that harm reduction has a really important role to play on the continuum of care for an individual. I sort of see it as, in the space of talking about the policy itself, that, if your loved one uses substances, you'll do anything to keep them alive till the next day. Because maybe tomorrow they'll want to go to treatment or get help or see a counselor. But today we just have to keep them alive so that tomorrow, when they're ready to think about that, they're still here. And, so we would have those conversations with the communities around a community of the city of Thunder Bay, in particular, around a managed alcohol program that was a program that still exists attached to that shelter, to convince the city that providing people with dosage of palatable alcohol in a regular timed fashion would reduce public intoxication and drinking of non-palatable substances, which is way harder to deal with and results in far more emergency calls to 911, using up services that otherwise might be used for other community members. The street outreach program was built around meeting people where they're at. There are a number of people who are street engaged who, for whatever reason, won't engage with the shelter system or other systems of support. But we could go out there and give them mittens and hats and reduce the calls from the general public to EMS to help provide care for someone who might be collapsed. And we worked really closely with EMS and the police. In fact, I was just speaking to the city police about some other issue recently, and unprompted, one of the police officers said, "Man, I miss SOS. We used to call them so often. It was so helpful for navigating the system." So those difficult conversations in my own community, I think, was the foundation for my ability to have difficult conversations with Canadians and with my colleagues, and to do politics properly. It's the way I see doing politics properly.
Yeah, and everyone has such an individual approach to politics, I think, when you're a minister or even an MLA.
Yeah.
How do you reach people right now when we, in really challenging times, when people are becoming more polarized in our, there's misinformation, there's disinformation, the decline of, the print media, right?
Yeah.
There are fewer and fewer journalists able to ask those tough and necessary questions.
Yeah. I don't know the answer to that question, because I'm not sure that nationally we are reaching people that well. I'm not sure that we have actually,
as a government, or
I think in general, yes, as a government, but as a society. I think that, I think it's getting worse at a rate that we can't even imagine. When and I'm more of like a Twitter voyeur, I don't really, obviously I have an official Twitter handle, but I do go on Twitter and I watch what's happening, and I find it useful when there's crises and things nationally and internationally. But I'm just sort of shocked at the layers and layers of misinformation and twisting of information, and everybody on there asserting that what they're saying is factually based. And I think, how can anyone actually tease apart what's real and what's not?
Well, there's no ability for, even now with more characters, there's no room for nuance.
No. And life is nuanced, right? And so is politics. Yeah. There is no perfect. We were talking about this today at a meeting I was at, that to get to true consensus on anything, first of all, you have to define what consensus is. Yeah. But supposing you define consensus as more or less everybody agrees, that's almost like it's an illusion, actually. It's very difficult to get to full consensus. but it's very difficult to even agree. It's going to be impossible if we can't even agree on a set baseline of what's real and what's not real.
And that's really hard right now.
It is really hard right now. And it makes me think that, we're in a time where local matters more than ever. And the reason I say this is, and maybe I sound a bit, maybe it's 9 years of politics that's making me go, a little bit crazy here, but, with the impact of climate change, for example, and the way that we see sort of decimation of communities when a climate related disaster happens. And we know that that's only going to accelerate. Even if we were to stop all emissions today, the scientists say that we're going to see a heating effect for the next decade. That's if everything stopped today. So, facing reality around climate change to me means two things. One, doing all that we can do to reduce our emissions and try to prevent the worst of it from happening. But secondly, strengthening our relationships with community. When, am I allowed to swear on this podcast? When shit goes down, we need each other. And, we need each other all the time. We forget that. We forget that we're each other's people. And that's one of, I think, the most toxic aspects of social media is that people aren't doing this in a group. They're not sitting in a boardroom or in a community hall or in a, meeting of Boy Scout leaders or whatever, deliberating about the news today. They're doing it alone in their living room in a mock sort of community.
If it's even real.
If it's even real. Right. And at the end of the day, we need each other. And so increasingly, I've been thinking that, that local level of organizing, as much as I love federal politics, the local level of organizing is incredibly important because we need people who will feed people. We need people who will make decisions about how we're going to protect our communities. We need bold leaders who will say, climate change is real. And so we're going to put in, water management systems to protect our infrastructure. And we're going to invest in the kinds of things that we know are going to be there in case there's a forest fire. And we're going to prepare our community for whatever comes up. And we're going to support the networks that exist on food security, for example.
And I completely agree. Like community is so important, undervalued, underfunded, underappreciated, under everything.
Yeah.
There's a strong headwind right now that is pushing community up to the side, in my opinion, and a focus more on the individual. How do we deal with that? Like, how do we tackle that? This idea that, that we're somehow not stronger and that we've lost this sense of community and that we're better off by looking out for one another. That's not a weakness, right? And that how we spend our money and, the like housing and infrastructure. And I don't want my money paying for someone's childcare, right? Like, where do we go from here? It's like, it's sometimes it's easy to fall in kind of a little pit of despair.
A bit of a funk. Yeah, for sure.
It's really serious. There's an election in BC that's going to have significant consequences depending on the outcome.
Yeah.
We're here in Alberta. We have a government that is actively legislating against its own people, targeting, the most vulnerable in our population. And at the same time, and then they're looking at polls and saying, oh, people are actually okay with this. Right. And it's like a license to go even further. And you're on the federal side of things, but looking down on all of this,
well, I think there's those winds of change are flying around everywhere. And it's not just in Canada. It's kind of a global thing that we're seeing a phenomenon. I will say what gives me hope is that countries that have flirted with that approach that you wouldn't have thought would have in some cases not spent a lot of time there as systems collapse or as people feel that, the very structures that are meant to protect them are actually falling apart. I guess what I'm kind of saying is sometimes people have to feel that to understand what it means to truly be alone. I would also say that there's, incredible work happening at the community level. And I think that how we, at the federal level, one of the things that we've tried to do is to support that organizational work that's happening through direct support for organizations on the ground. There's this amazing organization in Thunder Bay called Roots to Harvest it started off as essentially kind of like a youth development program where they used gardening and learning how to plant things as a way to work with kids that were disengaged from work or from school. Lots of Indigenous kids, lots of different kids, newcomer kids, and that organization has grown tremendously. And they are actually starting now to build connections between seniors who are coming for a lunch program with the youth that are preparing the food. And it's hard work to connect your community. It's not like, poof, here we go. We all love each other. And so our government has tried to ensure that these not-for-profit organizations that are doing that work in a variety of different spaces, I could talk about that for a long time, have the resources, financial resources to keep going. I think that's really important. But I also think that we can't be pushed into a space of fighting on the playing field or the battlefield of our opponents. Like it's tempting to go to a place of nasty to fight nasty.
You mean like more of the Michelle Obama when, they go low, we go high kind of?
Yeah, not so much that. I mean, you should have vigorous fights and you should call out inconsistencies. It's not like you can ignore it.
Right.
But you can't agree with the premise. You can't agree with the premise that everybody really is out for themselves. You can't agree with the premise that that if you're poor,
that everything is broken.
That if you're poor, that it's because you didn't try hard enough.
Right.
You have to fight back on those premises, or else what are we doing here? Like if we all agree that we should lock poor people up and have poorhouses again, if we all agree, then like count me out. I'm just going home and I'm going to do the stuff that I just talked about at the grassroots level. I'm going to see if my old neighbor wants me to walk their dog, or if I can, participate in food share program or whatever the case may be. We can't agree with the premise. If there's nobody out there saying this is a pretty dark place we're going, then we've sort of given up. So, there was this philosopher that used to say, the arc of the universe is, what is it? The moral arc of the universe is long, but ever does it bend towards justice, something like that. Some people say no. I have to believe in that. I have to believe that even though we can't see right now where the arc is going, that humanity will insist again that we'll take care of each other. And, not everybody feels this way. There's,
it's just the suffering in between, right?
There always is. Though.
Yeah.
There always is. And, in my space of First Nations rights, I mean, this is one thing that I have, incredibly viscerally felt is that the suffering has been ongoing and continuous. And yet they still fight. They fight for their sovereignty, for their treaty rights, for their children, for equity. And, we can take a lesson from that.
Yeah.
As progressives, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much. Sometimes it feels overwhelming because it's, all of the things going on. And I hear increasingly from women that they're not paying attention on purpose because of how horrible the world is and how overwhelming it can seem. And it's just the decision to just actually not pay attention, which I think is dangerous in its own right. Like everyone needs a break.
But it's survival.
It's survival.
Right.
But in the, while that's happening, like there's so much danger, I think, in so many, if all, women, especially, I think right now is a really critical time in terms of like women's rights and conversations around, what happens here in Alberta on abortion. There's a movement right now to make more public hospitals run by a Catholic healthcare provider.
I saw that. Yeah.
And that's a backdoor way to limiting
and made.
Right. And so, how do we I want more people to pay attention and to be aware of this issue. And I also know how just tough life is in general. Right. And, but at the same time, inflation, what is it? 1.6% right now? We've got Who would have thought?
Who would have thought we'd had the soft landing that we were hoping for,
Right?
that many countries didn't achieve, actually.
Yeah. I mean, all things considered, Canada's done really well coming out of COVID, but at the same time, they're not seeing the cost of groceries go down, right? A basket that cost, used to cost $50 is now $100. Everything, even when the barometers are trending towards the positive, they don't necessarily see it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, the reality is that, food prices are a complex mix of things.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's, was partly inflationary, but it's also climate and war.
Yeah.
We forget that Ukraine, being the biggest bread basket in the world, had huge amount of their land flooded when the dam was bombed by Russia, and were not able to produce the kinds of grain that they could before. We forget that when oranges collapse because of hurricanes, that the price of orange juice goes through the roof. We forget that when there's whatever it is now, H5N1, that's it, the outbreak in cattle all across the United States, thankfully a little less here in Canada, that it affects the price of dairy and beef. Like, these are real things.
Yeah. And then climate change in terms of,
and then climate change on top of it.
Right.
So, the reality is that those are very, challenging, sticky things that the federal government doesn't have a ton of support to be able to change. But what we have been doing, and this, is trying to address it on the other side. So, all of the federal benefits indexed to inflation, increasing CPP, so people your generation will have a more generous retirement, doubling the working income tax benefit for low income workers, a number of other measures, as the Canada, I'm sure many ministers have given you the list. And these are important things that are helping, young families, working mothers, my brother-in-law, who was able to get dental care for the first time in 20 years,
How do you deal, though, with people who are like, okay, this is all well and good. I'm so glad you've done these things. But thank you. What's next?
Yeah, well, that's always a part of politics. Yeah. I actually think that's always part of politics. And I think that's one of the propositions that we're going to have to make to Canadians. What's next? I personally don't think that going into an election saying, look at everything we've done, is strong enough. People want to know where we're going to go. Yeah. They want to know who's going to help them when shit hits the fan. Yeah. They want to know how they're going to get their kids through their education, and will their child have a future that might include owning a piece of property. Right. They want to know the answers to, where Canada's going to go on the international stage as things degrade all around us in terms of war. They want to know that. And those are fair questions, really. And I think that, that's what elections are for, is to present, a vision of what the country ought to be doing in a variety of different, realms, including those few that I've listed.
Are there conversations on the party side of things around having, conversations about what that might look like?
Absolutely. And that's why we have, a party, right? Yeah. And we have platform leads, and we have, campaign chairs, and a whole mechanism that works, including with the resolutions that come from the riding associations to figure out what the next platform might look like. And, there is a timing piece to this, right? Yeah. So unfortunately, elections are competitive processes. And so if you show your hand too early and you talk about all the great things, your opponent may decide that they're going to block, poke holes in it. Right. So, these are not decisions that I have a direct influence over, but I certainly do have an opportunity as a member of parliament, as a liberal, to be able to say, hey, these are the things that the constituents I represent are worrying about. These are the ideas that are coming forward, supporting the work of my EDA in their resolution making. And that's important work. And we forget about it, that, I think we as Canadians forget about it, that, these parties don't just exist absent of people. The Conservative Party has an equally engaged base with riding associations and policy directors, and a party and a platform that's coming together and figuring out. And they're doing the same thing. And they're trying to make the same calculations about what should be in there and what will resonate, and whether or not they pull, the trigger right now on letting go a part of their platform or not. And so these are the challenges of modern day elections. But But that's what the next election has to be, in my mind. I hope that Canadians will think, what do they want this country to look like over the next 5, 10, 50 years?
And this is going to be a bit of an unfair question, but what do you think the next ballot box question is going to be for the next federal election?
That's hard. I mean, I think obviously we're in a big conversation about affordability right now. So I think anybody who didn't think that that wasn't going to be part of the conversation might be a bit naive. I certainly hear about it from Canadians, but I would also say that I'm not sure. Like for me, it was so funny when I was first became the candidate. I wasn't a liberal. I went to this Liberal Riding Association meeting. They're like, "Who the hell are you?" And they're like, well, look, and I talked a lot about housing and homelessness and poverty alleviation.
And this is when you
I was a candidate. Before I was a candidate.
Okay.
And one guy there, I did, yeah.
Okay.
And I was kind of interviewing them, and they were interviewing me, and we were in that like getting to know each other. And one guy said to me, "You have to stop talking about homelessness. You can't win on that. Nobody gives a shit about this. Don't talk about like that. And you're going to have to talk about like FedNor or economic development," which I knew not that much about at that time. And I said, "Okay, well, just watch me." And I did. Everywhere I went, I introduced myself. I talked about the fact that I ran the shelter. I talked about the fact that I thought that poverty dragged us all down as a community, that we could do better, that families needed more support to raise their kids. Canada Child Benefit was a big part of it. I talked about drug policy, talked about the legalization of marijuana and the way that I'd seen it criminalize young people and ruin young people's lives, despite the fact that 67% or something of Canadians had used cannabis. On and on. And I ran a campaign that felt authentic to me. Of course, I talked about other things, and I learned what FedNor was, and I talked about the need for, more money for FedNor and, mining and all the things.
To be honest, I don't know what FedNor is.
Oh, sorry. It's an economic development agency in Northern Ontario,
exactly.
but so important
By
to the
the
region.
name, you would think Fed and Nor,
right?
Something North.
Yes. So, but actually, funny you should say that, because the majority of my own constituents had no idea what FedNor was, even though this dude was so sure that I needed to know like all of the inner workings of this agency. And, that relationship that I developed over those, in that case, 12 months of campaigning, went a long way. It went a long way. People had a bit of a sense of who I was from my previous work in the community. I showed them who I was at the door. I still do that every time. I was at an event the other day, and this woman said, "You should be the next leader of the Liberal Party because, he really screwed up when he legalized cannabis." I said, "Well, we got a problem."
Yeah. You're talking to someone who's
you would not like my drug policy, but I've always been that way with people, like forthright. This is who I am. You can choose it. You can not choose it. You can like it. You can not like it. I'm going to tell you who I am. And I think those authentic relationships are so important in politics.
Yeah.
I'm okay saying to a constituent, "I don't share your perspective." I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Because I know that I am not going to get 100% of the vote. I know that there are at least probably 60% of the people who won't vote for me, but at least they know who I am and where I stand. And, I think that matters in the times that we're in.
Yeah. Well, it's my first time meeting you, and I really, really like your approach to this conversation. And I think obviously this isn't like just, the way you are right now, but like in your frankness.
I don't know how to be anybody else, unfortunately. Or maybe fortunately.
No, there's I think this level of, just being matter of fact is actually what's missing it from, politics.
Yeah.
I think people need that authenticity more.
They want to have real conversations. People are not idiots, right? They want to be able to have a conversation about what they're scared about, what they're hearing, what you think about what they're hearing. The number of times I have conversations about stuff online, and, I don't go at it like, "Oh, that's a conspiracy theory." I say to them, "Tell me some more things about that. Tell me more about why you think that might be real. Where did you read that?" So that we have a real authentic conversation that's not like undermining the intelligence. And that's where I think
making people feel stupid.
That's the problem. Yeah. Like if we go at it where, you're trying to dispel what you see as a conspiracy theory without understanding how a person got to that place,
right?
Then you've missed an opportunity. And, look, not everybody is going, like, some people you cannot have
Yeah.
conversations with. That's just part of politics. Sometimes you hit a door or have a conversation and the best answer is, I don't share your perspective, and the end of story.
Yeah.
But there's a whole bunch of people in the middle that want to know what you think about a thing. I heard this thing online. I saw this thing where the prime minister said that. Oh, Pierre Poilievre said this the other day. What does that mean? And if you make a safe space for people to have those conversations, I'm not saying it's necessarily electorally successful, but it's respectful.
Yeah.
And aren't we trying to bring some respect back to this profession?
I'm trying. I want more people in politics. I want kids to care about I want kids to think about politics as a career option.
Yeah.
Not as like I'm going to do poli-sci and then law and then I'm going to have a long tenured career in politics, right? Like more people who have
regular people. And we have thank God, and this is worth fighting for to protect. At the federal level, we have a system where regular people like me, a single mom of 2 boys who had really nothing, can get into politics because we have maximum donations that have to be from individuals. I think it's $1,700 now. Sounds like a lot of money to a lot of people, but it's not enough to bribe your politician to vote one way or the other. It's not enough to, sway the vote. And so, and it's also, the limits on each individual campaign, each riding. So for me, it's somewhere in the range of 120,000 means that you can kind of see in your mind, like I could raise 40, I could raise 50, maybe I could raise 60. And there's an entry, the price of entry is not so prohibitive that you can't get regular people. We want regular people. You're right. In politics. Yeah.
Yeah. I think
so let's protect that.
There need to be more moms, single moms. I was raised by a single mom. That's going to change the decisions that are being made.
And you're seeing it now. I mean, people may not appreciate just the value of childcare, but not only on the individual level is it actually helping families with the reduced costs of childcare, but it's also, we have more women in the workforce than ever before.
Yeah.
And, when you have quality childcare, you can go to work, you can study, you can do a whole bunch of things to sort of self-actualize in a way that makes sense for you. And we need more policy decision makers that are thinking through the lens of equity and through the lens of everyone reaching their full potential. So whether it's more women, whether it's more Indigenous people, whether it's looking at our own parliamentary system of, Prime Minister said it himself, he regrets the democratic reform missed opportunity. Maybe we'll have that conversation again as a country because, there's lots of people's voices who are not present in that room, who are making decisions on behalf of people who don't have a say in that process. So,
well, yeah, I definitely think it's important that, the decision table look like, society, right? Am I an advocate for more finance bros in politics? Absolutely not. Right. I don't need to be in a room with another, table full of guys wearing, down vests telling me that, isn't it nice and childcare, right? That's just, that's not going to move society forward. That's going to move them and their interests forward. There has to be a more diverse group of people advocating for more diverse interests and having, and having those tricky conversations around what is consensus and, how do we make these decisions and who are we making them for?
Yeah. And how we bring more voices into the process. Like the water legislation that I'm working on, it's the closest to co-developed that we've ever done. I can't say co-developed because it truly hasn't been fully co-developed. In fact, we have a system that doesn't allow for First Nations people to be in the room at the cabinet table, for example, as decisions are being made on their behalf about whether or not we support this legislation, et cetera. But there was active participation in the drafting of that legislation, multiple conversations and consultations over the last 3 years. Isn't that kind of exciting? Like bringing more voices into policymaking rather than, a few elected people making decisions on behalf of everyone in this particular group of people that are going to be the direct recipients of that law. And really it only and most deeply affects them. So
yeah, I don't want more decisions benefiting when people are like, let's go, I don't like the way it is now. I want to go back to the way it was, however many years ago. And that worked really well for us. Actually, no, that worked really well maybe for you but that actually, let's talk about, who had the vote, what rights people had, what rights people didn't have. Um, you know, that's not a time that actually served everyone well. It might served you, probably Sam Smith as a white man, really well, but didn't probably work for your wife, probably didn't work for your daughter, probably didn't work for
Might not have worked for him either, though.
Well,
I think
yeah,
that's where
it's
we have.
yeah.
I think that's where we have to go. I think we have to sort of help people understand that, absolute control, although it might seem appealing, has some real downsides, And
well, I mean, yeah, it does.
It does. And I think that, I used to say this all the maybe it's because I'm the mother of two adult men, but the grief that men carry around having to be the way men have to be.
Yeah.
We never talk about it. We have a hard time actualizing the voice around that. I'll tell you the reason I'm thinking about this is, for example, environmental degradation. So I'm a blended family now, and two of my four sons are in construction in one way or another. And both of them told me stories recently about feelings they had around, environmental destruction related to their jobs. And, many men that I've spoken to who have lived that experience, they feel like they have to have a stiff upper lip. It's part of it, whether you're cutting down, an old growth stand of trees, or there's a leak in a river and fish die, or and yes, there's environmental protections and all of that. But lots of times, things happen. And I was speaking with a friend of mine that used to work in the operating engineers, and I was telling him about these stories, and I was saying, 30% of your tradespeople are struggling with substance use.
It's a huge problem.
Yeah, 30%. And I said, have you ever done any grief work? I mean, oh my God, say that to a bunch of men.
It's happening in BC, actually.
And it is, because people are starting to understand that the way that patriarchy works is that it assigns very rigid roles for all of us.
Yes.
And playing those very rigid roles, and control is part of that, is very harmful to everyone in the game. And so how do we change the game so that we can have more respectful conversations, so that we can include men in the emotions of living in a way that feels safe for them, in a way that includes them? How do we?
Well, I mean, Kim, his Mojo Dojo Casa House. I don't know if you know the reference. No, from the Barbie movie.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Right. Wasn't well served by
right.
Patriarchy also, did not serve him well.
These systems of colonial patriarchy are hard on everyone.
Yeah.
And so, that's the work that I'm trying to think through now is, when I knock on the door of, blue collar voter in my riding, how do I see him in a way that he feels respected?
Yeah.
So if the conversation starts with I hate your leader, or you guys are dumb, or the carbon tax, depending on, listen, I'm not going to stick around for abuse. That's just the bottom line for me. But if the conversation is posed in a way that I also feel safe, I want to have that conversation. Actually, I want to hear what he thinks, and I want to hear what his solutions are.
Yeah.
And I want to hear what he thinks the solutions are. If it's not this, then what?
Yeah.
We should be asking those questions. And
I think if not this, then what is a profound question, right? Because you can be unhappy about something, you can dislike it, but okay, but we need to do something, right? What is it?
Yeah.
And just doing nothing isn't the option.
And people worry. They worry about their kids and their grandkids. And that is an opening for us to connect 100%. From both the right, quote unquote, and the left.
Yeah.
We can both agree that we love our kids and grandkids beyond everything.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good place to start.
Yeah.
What do we do to make sure our grandkids and our, have a planet that we can be fairly certain that they can live on?
Yeah.
How do we, what do we do to protect, the wellness of our kids in this time where everybody's so stressed out and addicted to their phone? How do we have those conversations in a way that don't judge each other? But, and maybe I'm too Pollyanna, but
no, I feel that as a parent, there's, it's everything is, yeah, there's coming at it, personally, I had, a teacher at my kid's school was like, oh, you let your kids watch TV before they come to school. And I was like, yeah, I do. I do. Because
Yeah.
that's like,
Yeah.
it's just, we found a routine and it works for us. It keeps them from fighting. Right. And is it maybe the most peak perfect parenting thing? No, it's absolutely not. But I also, in the drop off line, do you see the kids getting out who have screens in the back seat of the car?
Yeah.
Right. Like, just we just have to be so careful around how we throw things around.
Yeah.
Because like we're
Well,
not going to
everybody,
move the needle.
and I really do believe, other than maybe a few evil people, I don't know, like depends on the day, but there may be some evil people. But I really do believe that people are trying to figure it out. Like
Yeah. Well, and we're all
everybody's trying to figure it out. Like that's what your story tells me,
right?
It reminds me of all those years of a single parenting where I made so many small and profound mistakes. Thankfully my boys have forgiven me, I think. I'm pretty sure. But you do your best with the moment that you're in. And I think everybody's trying to do that. Everybody's trying to figure it out. So, okay. So yes, we live in in a country that has a Westminster system where every 4 years we have to go out and beat the shit out of each other and, probably in between as well and try and win government. But let's agree that we can still be kind to our neighbors, even quote unquote, if they're on the other team. Let's agree that conservatives are good people, and so are liberals and NDPs and Greens, and even folks further afield from the sort of main parties. Let's agree that everybody wants their kids to be healthy and happy, and then let's figure out how we chart a path forward. But anyways, that is a very Pollyanna place to end.
I think it's good. I think that, I come back. I try to, this place where we're sitting right now is my outlet to try and find the good in the bad.
Yeah.
And
yeah. And, like that's going to be the system for the foreseeable future, that we have a parliamentary system. I will say, when I arrived in Parliament after working in a collaborative way, listen, I wrote the Thunder Bay drug strategy. I had police there and harm reductionists at one point in the room. We all wrote it together. People who viscerally disagree at that time whether or not you should give out needles, never mind harm reduction kits or whatever. But we all got together and we found this path forward and we launched the Thunder Bay drug strategy. And it was really, at the time, very progressive and it said hard things. And I was so proud of everybody for doing that. And I think, that has deeply informed me in the way that I try to do the work. But I will say that the House isn't designed to do that. It's designed in a way that it pits people against each other. Now, older parliamentarians tell me that there was a time where parliamentarians used to duke it out on the House of Commons floor and then go have a drink or dinner together. And I hope that we get that back. I really do. I hope that we get to a place where I can say, I'm going for dinner with my, conservative critic, and we're going to laugh about our kids and talk about tomorrow together.
I want that for you and for politics.
And I think that hopefully Canadians will insist on it, that they will come to a place where they say, look, we expect you to work together. We expect you to work on our behalf together for a better Canada.
Well, so I hope so.
I hope so too.
Thank you for joining me. This is a great conversation.
Deep conversation. Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.